Yeah, that's all right. Yeah. Yeah.
Most doing shades tonight. Yeah, most doing.
Almost.
Very talented, like she.
Do you think so? Right. We are live now.
You're not ready for it. Yeah, I want to literally walk you around just to make it.
Yeah. Got a doctor's appointment on Tuesday. Yeah, right, I've got an appointment on Tuesday. No, it's all right. I actually went into her. She turned right. Cross of that.
Do you realize every word you're all saying is being recorded forevermore on YouTube unless YouTube stops working and then have they? What, billions? Where do they store it? Must have some computers.
They used to rent off Amazon. Amazon would make themselves massive and rent. I don't know if they rent out of Amazon or not, but the Amazon.
What's the time? Is it 25 to yet? Yeah, it started time. But okay. We're up to Daf Lametes Amud Aleph. 6 lines from the top. Actually, Gates had said no Bochim or Semgul is allowed to be invited by anybody over the whole Kehillah over Rosh Hashanah. I've got 2 children in Gates, one in Sunderland and one in Gates Shultan. And they want to be invited to 2 different places, one invited to one other place. And all 3 have cancelled, much to my disappointment to my children. 18 issue. Kulash. No, not allowed to have kulash. Actually, it's machlekes. Okay. After that, my test would have 6 lines from the top. Gufam. They're supposed to have milsa to b'dichusa. I'm not sure if that's milsa to b'dichusa. Says the word here is Gufam Av Yehuda. Maisa, yesterday we mentioned very briefly this price, so now we're going to mention the great Lametes would have 6 lines from the top. Basically, we're discussing somebody who wants to make it Eruv, where he's got 1 day Yom Tov, let's say 5 days of Yom Tov, and Shabbos, he wants to make an Eruv for both days. So the question is, how can he do it? What's the correct way to do it? So now we're going to describe it in greater detail. Gufa. Omar Yehuda, if on the first day he walked and stood 2,000 amos away, and he did the Eruv Tchumim with his feet, meaning with his presence, the Ma'arav Raglav B'Sheni, he can go the second day and do it again. Because, as we mentioned, standing is not considered a zilzal in Shabbos. What would people say about him when they see him walking 2,000 amos and standing there? What would they say? I remember it was right towards the end of this shiur. If it's the time Chacham, they'll say he was busy learning. And if it's somebody else, they'll say that what? Lost his donkey. Very good. So there's nothing wrong with walking on Friday afternoon when it's Yom Tov and standing up by the end of the Tchum. If you put a loaf of bread on the first day, then you can go on the second day and put a loaf of bread.
You have to do the same.
This is what the Gemara is going to describe. Why? Why are you going to do with the bread? Because then you don't need to say anything, because you've already said the declaration on the bread on the first day, and you just have to use using the same bread, so you don't need to make any declaration. You just put the bread there in the same place, and it works. If on the first day you use a loaf of bread, the second day you can walk there, because you don't need to say anything, and it's not considered achona. But if you did an Eruv Tchumin on the first day with your presence, with your feet, you can't on the second day go and put bread, because putting bread requires that you should make a statement. And making a statement is a achona from Yom Tov to Shabbos, from Shabbos to Yom Tov, depends which way around it is, and that is forbidden.
You say the fact that he's saying he's not saying that and not using it for nervous enough.
Again, because the first day he didn't use bread, the first day he used his presence. And on the second day, if on the first day you use bread, the second day is okay with bread because it doesn't need to say anything. All he does is just takes the bread and puts it back there. But if on the first day he uses presence, and now he has to say, this bread should be my v'shus, the Gemara now clarifies this. You have to use the same bread. If you use bread on the first day, you're allowed to use bread on the second day. As we said, you don't need to say anything. Says, well, that's only true if you use exactly the same loaf of bread. Our Mishnah, which we had on Lamed Ches Amud Aleph, is meduyek like this halacha, diktani. What should he do? And really the Mishnah is describing how should he make sure that the bread is still there. So what should he do? He takes it on the first day to the place, waits for Nacht, he takes the bread home, he comes back. On the second day, and he comes home. So you see that the Mishnah tells us take the same bread there and back. Now, why does it say take the same bread there and back? Is a right that you have to use the same bread. It says more v'rabbanon. What about the chachamim? Now, this is an interesting word. This one word brings a lot of tumult in the Shem. The chachamim that argue. Where exactly did we ever see the chachamim that argue that you're allowed to change bread on Shabbos? What's got kasha? Our Mishnah seems to be saying that you have to use the same bread because the Mishnah says take it there, wait, take it home, go back, and then the second day you can eat it because once it's the second day, there's nothing left to keep it for. The Rabbanon and the Chachamim that argue and say that you're allowed to use a different bread. So what's pshat in the Mishnah? But where is the Chachamim that ever argued on this? Where have you ever found Chachamim that argue on this principle that you're allowed to use a different bread? So Rashi, this is all discussed a little bit, and they say like this, that they think this. No, not this is so. Rabbanon, they say like this. That if you remember yesterday, Rabbi came along with this chiddush. The reason why you can't make an eruv tchumin the first time on Yom Tov to Shabbos, why can't you make a eruv tchumin on Yom Tov to Shabbos for the first time? Achon, it's achon. And Abaya and Rabbi Ba'achonin both disagreed with him. Abaya asked him, Kasha, if that's the case, how is a person allowed to even walk to the end of the tchum according to that tzachon? To which he said that you don't need to say anything. Rabbi Ba'achonin asked that's a zilzal in Shabbos. So the Gemara understood that they never held of Rabbi. What did they held? They held that making eruv tchumin is not considered tachana. Why is it not considered tachana? Because achana is when you're doing epsim alocha or something. Here, when you just designated that this is where you're living, that's not achana. And therefore, according to them, according to Abba and according to Rabbi Ba'achonin, you're allowed to change bread. Say, for example, or for example, if the first day you used your presence, the second day you're allowed to use bread. You don't have to do like Rabbi said that you have to use the same food. So according to them, there's a difficulty with our Mishnah. Because what did our Mishnah say? Our Mishnah said that you should take the bread there and back twice and use it. Why does the Mishnah talk about using the same bread? And said, no, the Mishnah was just telling us good advice. Why? Because when you make eruv tchumin, you have to make sure you've got the right, correct measurement of food. So if you've taken it the first day, you shouldn't need the second day to start creating a whole new eruv tchumin. So therefore, it's better just to use the same bread twice, but not because there's actually not because there's a chiyuv to use the same bread. Only it's preferable to use the same bread because you've made sure that it's the right shiur and therefore it's easier to use. So we've got machlokas. Can you make eruv tchumin on Yom Tov Shabbos? We pass them that you cannot. The next Mishnah discusses Rosh Hashanah. And Rashi goes at great length in showing him the halachas of Rosh Hashanah. Let's talk a tiny bit. All the Yom Tovim there, so we only keep 1 day, except for Rosh Hashanah 2 days. Chutz La'aretz, we keep everywhere 2 days, all the Yom Tovim. Why? The answer is, because in old days they kept Yom Tov based on the Eidim coming to tell us when the new moon came. So it would take time for everybody to find out. And it's so usually Pesach, Sukkot, and even Shavuos, they would find out in time. So therefore they would know. But in Chutz La'aretz, they would never know. So we have to keep 2 days. And even though nowadays we don't rely on that, Minhag Avosenu B'Yodeinu, etc. Now, the Eidim would always come on which day? Either day 30 or day 31. They could never come on day 29. Because it's impossible for day 29 for the new moon to come. Because it always takes 29 and a half days for the new moon to arrive. And Rambam actually adds that it takes 6 hours after the new moon appears before anybody can see it. So it actually takes about 29 days and about 18 hours before you see the new moon. Okay. So they would either come on day 30 or day 31. So what would Beis Din do? they would tell everybody, keep day 30, which is the last day in Elul, keep it as Rosh Hashanah. Why should you keep it as Rosh Hashanah? In case Adam come during the day and tell us that today is Rosh Hashanah. If Adam did come, so then everybody could keep Rosh Hashanah that day, and they did not need to keep the second day. And indeed, the people in Yerushalayim and the people who found out only kept that year one day Rosh Hashanah, if Adam came on the first day. If Adam didn't come on the first day, the more would happen is would come on the next day, then the next day would be Rosh Hashanah. And therefore, you'd have to keep 2 days Rosh Hashanah, even in Yerushalayim. And because of that, everyone there at Sol would always keep 2 days. The Gemara tells us in Rosh Hashanah that after Mincha time, they never allowed Adam to come. That means even if Adam there said, we saw the new moon, we would ignore them. And we would say to them, come back tomorrow. We weren't interested in accepting that. The reason is quite a complicated reason. The basic gist of it is like this, that the Levim had to sing a special song when they would be in the Korban Tomit. The Korban Tomit of the morning of Rosh Hashanah, they always sang the weekday one, because usually Adam would never come before that Korban Tomit of the morning. The Korban Tomit of the afternoon, one year, they sang this song of the weekday. Then came along Adam and said, actually, it's Rosh Hashanah. And the Levim didn't know what to sing now. Should they continue with the weekday? Should they start again with the Rosh Hashanah one? And therefore, they didn't know which song to sing. Because of that, they said, once it's Mincha time, we don't listen to the Adam anymore. But we call it today, we'll call it tomorrow Rosh Hashanah. But nevertheless, even though when it came to Mincha time, Adam hadn't come. So we would know 100% that today is not going to be Rosh Hashanah. The halacha is that you had to keep the rest of the day Kodesh. Why? Let's work it out. No, it's not. You know for definite it's not going to be Rosh Hashanah. At 9 o'clock in the morning, basically, the first day of Rosh Hashanah would say, keep Rosh Hashanah. If Adam would come at 11 o'clock, would be very happy, kept Rosh Hashanah. The next day, won't bother to be Rosh Hashanah. If there was after 4 o'clock, let's say in the afternoon, about Mincha time, then they would say no more Adam. So really, the next day is Rosh Hashanah. So therefore, from 4 till Nacht, you can actually do malachas. But if we allow people to do malachas, what will happen? The next year, they'll say to themselves, last year we didn't do any malachas all the way till 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and 4 o'clock in the afternoon we were allowed to do what we wanted. So this year we'll say to ourselves, obviously it wasn't really Rosh Hashanah. So this year it's also not really Rosh Hashanah the first day. And what they won't realize is that this year Adam actually would come, and therefore it is really Rosh Hashanah. So therefore they said that you always have to keep the first day. Sometimes you also have to keep the second day. Because of the fact that Chazal established Rosh Hashanah as always a time that you have to keep the first day, and sometimes also the second day, not because of a suffix, but you always have to, even when we know that it's not. Therefore, Rosh Hashanah's got a special chiyuv called Kedusha Achas. It's got one Kedusha. So now we've got 3 different times when you can have 2 days. You can have 2 days of Sukkot, right? Monday, Tuesday, Sukkot, 2 days. 1 day, the next day. Regarding that, could you say an Eruv Techumin for one? That is the least likely to be one Kedusha. Why? Because everybody knows it's either the first day or the second day. So that's the least likely to be a Kedusha Achas. The most likely to be Kedusha Achas is 2 days Rosh Hashanah, because Chazal were kivea that it's like 1 day. The one in between is when you have Yom Tov then Shabbos. Yom Tov then Shabbos has the advantage over Rosh Hashanah that it's not like 1 day, because Rosh Hashanah was established as a 48-hour period of Yom Tov, which is 1 chiyuv of Yom Tov. Now, if 1 day, let's say Friday is Yom Tov, Rosh Hashanah, and Friday is Sukkot, and Shabbos is Shabbos, so then that's not 1 48-hour period. It's 2 separate Kedushas. One's Kedushas Yom Tov, one's Kedushas Shabbos. On the other hand, it's not like 2 days Yom Tov. Why is it worse than 2 days Yom Tov? Because 2 days Yom Tov, you know definitely that one of them is a weekday. Here, both are Kaddish. So if regarding a Ruvei Tchumen, making from one to the next, you've got 3 different situations. 2 days Yom Tov and Shabbos, and 2 days Rosh Hashanah. Regarding Yom Tov and Shabbos, what is the halacha? Does anybody know? Yeah, you always like to say machlokas. But when did we have the machlokas? Yes, the last Mishnah was the machlokas. The very last Mishnah we did, Rabbi Lezer said that it's 2 separate days, and therefore you can make an Eruv for 1 day and a different Eruv for the next day. So you can choose on the Friday Yom Tov to go east, and on the Shabbos to go west. The Chachamim there argued with him, and they said to him, no, it is one kedusha. We pass like who? Like Rabbi Lezer, that's two separate kedushas. And we disregard the shit of the Chachamim completely. So we pass like Rabbi Lezer. Our Mishnah comes to tell us that in the Rosh Hashanah time, it is worse than Yom Tov and Shabbos. Yom Tov and Shabbos is indeed two separate kedushas. You can make one day Eruv A and next day Eruv B. But regarding Rosh Hashanah, you can't do that even according to Rabbi Lezer. That means even according to Rabbi Lezer, that regarding Yom Tov and Shabbos, you can split and cut it into two. Regarding Rosh Hashanah, you can't. Now, what would you say regarding 2 days Yom Tov, not Rosh Hashanah, not Yom Tov and Shabbos? That Kavachim, that what? Kavachim, it's okay. So really, if anybody would say that 2 days Yom Tov, you can't split it in half, that would be a very, very chiddush, because that would be very hard to accept. Okay. Now, regarding Rosh Hashanah, what I said to you that everybody agrees, not everybody. There's one shit that argues. Let's see. Rabbi Yehuda. So Rabbi Yehuda says, in the Mishnah, Rosh Hashanah, a person standing on the first day of Rosh Hashanah, and the Eidim haven't yet come, and he's concerned, or actually it's before Yom Tov. So he's thinking to himself, maybe I'll end up 2 days Rosh Hashanah. He's living in Yerushalayim. Sometimes it's 1 day Rosh Hashanah, sometimes 2 days Rosh Hashanah, depending if the Eidim came before Menachalot. If Eidim came before Menachalot, there's only 1 day Rosh Hashanah. If Eidim didn't come before Menachalot, there are 2 days Rosh Hashanah. So he's standing Erev Rosh Hashanah, and he's concerned that this might happen. So Ma'av Adam Shnei Eiruvin. V'oiman, he says like this. Eiruvin bevisha nemizach b'sheni nemav, or bevisha nemav b'sheni nemizach. You can say the first day I want to go east, next day west, or vice versa. Or Eiruvin bevisha, the first day I shall Eruv, b'sheni kibnei iri, the second day I'll be like my city, I can go wherever I want. Eiruvin b'sheni, the second day the Eruv, or bevisha kibnei iri, v'lo yehudu lo chachamim, they do not agree with him. That means, according to the chachamim of the last Mishnah, that Shabbos and Yom Tov, you're not allowed to split it. Of course you can't split Rosh Hashanah, because Rosh Hashanah is much worse, because it's one Kedusha. But even according to Rabbi Lezer that says you can split it, they said by Rosh Hashanah you can't split it, because they consider it to be one Kedusha. Once we mentioned Gabi Uvit Chumit of Yehuda says the same halacha in 2 other places. That means this Chiddush of Rabbi Yehuda, that he considers both days Rosh Hashanah to be separate Kedushas, Rabbi Yehuda says it in 2 other cases. What's the 2 other cases? Let's say a person forgot to take Tumas HaMaisus. Forgot to take Tumas HaMaisus. Is it allowed to take Tumas HaMaisus on Shabbos and Yom Tov? No, Tikkun Mona, Makabah Patish. Tikkun Mona is Gzeir D'Rabbanan Makabah Patish. So what does he do? Can't do anything about it. If he's got 2 days of normal Yom Tov, what can he do? Let's say Sukkot is a Monday, Tuesday. So he says like this. On Monday he says, if it is the day Yom Tov, so then tomorrow I want the produce to take Tumas HaMaisus from one part to the other. And the next day he says, if yesterday was Yom, if today is Yom Tov, and if today is not Yom Tov, every day he says like this, if today is Yom Tov, nothing should happen. But if it's not Yom Tov, I want to take Tumas HaMaisus. And he says the same thing again the next day. And then he's sure that he's taken Tumas HaMaisus because one of those days definitely a weekday. Says Rabbi Yehuda, you can do that shtick on Rosh Hashanah as well.
So like grain, if it wins.
Yeah. What do you do, Rabbi Yehuda? Master Advan Al-Khalid's got a bowl. Beyond Vision. That's the same thing. He holds the same thing by next Shnelat. And he can eat it on the second day. Oh, Levi, an egg that's born on the first day. So in 3 cases, Rabbi Yehuda holds that Rosh Hashanah is 2 days. Regarding an egg, it doesn't matter because each day is a suffix weekday, suffix Yom Tov. And regarding taking Tumas HaMaisus, and regarding a Vuvei Tchumen, and the Maisa, we would agree with Rabbi Yehuda on all these 3 halachas if it wouldn't have been Rosh Hashanah. It would be Sukkot, Pesach, or Shavuos. Because it's Rosh Hashanah, we don't agree with him in any of these 3. Now, every Rosh Hashanah is also Rosh Chodesh. We actually mentioned it in the Musaf Shmoneh Esrei. So should you mention the Rosh Chodesh, that's A, and also you never know which day is Rosh Chodesh. So Abdoisa made a special takana of how to daven on Rosh Hashanah. Those that can ask him, even if they are table the Chazan, Yom Tov Rosh Hashanah Omer, Hachlitzenu Hashem Elokeinu es Yom Rosh Chodesh Hazeh, Imayom Im Lamocha. On Rosh Hashanah he says, Hashem strengthened me on this day of Rosh Chodesh, whether today is Rosh Chodesh or whether tomorrow is Rosh Chodesh. And Rashi explains it means if today is Rosh Chodesh, strengthen me today, and if tomorrow is Rosh Chodesh, strengthen me tomorrow. If yet today or yesterday. The Chachamim didn't agree with him. And the Gemara discusses great length. The Gemara discusses exactly what they didn't agree with him about. So again, Doisa added 2 points to his tefillah. One is that he mentioned Rosh Chodesh, and the second, that you daven to Hashem, that you have the tefillah of Rosh Chodesh. And the second thing he added was that you have to say a conditional tefillah, which is quite a strange tefillah. If today's Rosh Chodesh, be mechazek as Hashem, and if tomorrow's Rosh Chodesh, be mechazek as tomorrow. Okay. So Chachamim didn't agree with it. It says the word like this. Man loy hoidu loy. Who did not agree with Rabbi Yehuda that Rosh Hashanah is considered 2 days? Omar Rav, Rabbi Yossi, the Tanya, Moed v'Chachamim Rabbi Eliezer. The Chachamim agree with Rabbi Eliezer, Rosh Hashanah, Shoyu Yori, Shemotis Abba, Me'av Adam Shnei Eiruvin. This, you can make 2 different Eiruvin. Eiruvin Rishon and Mizrach Shini and Amav. And you can like Rabbi Yehuda Bar Mishnah, that you're allowed to make an Eruv of 1 to the east, 1 to the west. Rishon and Amav, the first day to the west, Shini and Mizrach. So the Chachamim say that you can do such a thing, that make an Eruv 1 day here, 1 day there. Oh, here it's very strange. We're using the word Chachamim, and we actually mean only Rabbi Yehuda. Okay. Rabbi Yossi is, in fact, I can't remember if I saw it before, the Meiri, he says like this, that the Gemara starts off, man loy hoidu loy plural, Amar Rabbi Yossi. We say it's a one person. What do you mean? Why are you calling him Rabbi Yossi? The answer is that whenever we agree with someone, we call him the Rabbi because we agree. So Rabbi Yossi over here is the Chacham. Yeah, so what did you say? Yeah, Rabbi Yossi is the Chacham. So Rabbi Yossi is the one who says it's no good. Now Rabbi Yossi tries to prove it. Amar and Rabbi Yossi, don't you agree? If Eidim come after Mincha, that you have to treat first day Rosh Hashanah Kodesh and the second day Rosh Hashanah Kodesh. Even though you know 100%, what's the problem? That the first day is Kodesh, second day is Kodesh. Rabbi Yossi says like this: if Eidim don't come before Mincha, then what happens is we carry it on till tomorrow, and we still have to behave as if it's Rosh Hashanah. What does that prove? That proves like this: that we don't keep Rosh Hashanah because maybe it's Rosh Hashanah, maybe not. Because if that's the only reason we kept the first day, if the only reason we kept the first day was because it's a suffix, maybe it's Rosh Hashanah. Now that we know 100% sure that it's not Rosh Hashanah, we won't keep it. Elamai, the reason that we keep it is because Chazal decided that Rosh Hashanah should be an entity of 48 hours. Once they made it an entity of 48 hours, so therefore it's not a suffix whether it's Kaddish or not. You know for definite it is Kaddish. Otherwise, if it's only a suffix, they should say, well, now we know it's not Rosh Hashanah, let's not keep it. And here's where Rashi goes in at great length, that he explains the svaras of why we don't do it, why we don't think, because we don't want the Levim to get mixed up with the Shiur. Okay, says the Gemara. That's Rabbi Yehuda that disagrees. It's not Kaddish at all. It's nothing to do with Kedusha. Be'emes is, once you know it's not Rosh Hashanah, it's not Rosh Hashanah. The Chazal did not want you to mezalzel in it, and that's why you have to keep it. So, Maisa, we've got Machlekes over here as to whether we consider both days of Rosh Hashanah as one entity or as a suffix. Rabbi Yehuda in our Mishnah considers it as a suffix, and from the fact that he considers it as a suffix, he came up with 3 colors. Color number 1, you can choose your Eruv on one day to be different from the Eruv on the next day. Color number 2 is that if you've got produce and you haven't taken Tumas and Maisvers, you can, between the 2 days, you'll only be able to eat it on the second day, by the way. It's supposed to be very clear. You won't be able to eat this produce. Let's say this is the bowl of fruit, right? So I've got over here a big bunch of grapes, and it's first day of Rosh Hashanah. According to Aviv, I'm not sure if the first day is Kaddish, second day is Kaddish. So therefore, what I do is like this. I take Tumas and Maisvers, and I make a condition, and I say like this: if today is Yom Tov, what I've said is nothing. But if it's not Yom Tov, then it should be Tumas and Maisvers. The next day, I say, if yesterday was Yom Tov and today is weekday, I'm taking Tumas and Maisvers now. If today is Yom Tov, so I've already taken Tumas and Maisvers yesterday, so I don't need to take Tumas and Maisvers again. Yes, that's right. The first day could still be Tevel, because maybe it's Yom Tov. So it's only on the second day that you can actually eat it. So the second color is that by the second day of Rosh Hashanah, you'll be able to eat your grapes because you'll have taken Tumas and Maisvers with Monafshach. And the third kula is regarding the egg, that egg which is born first of Rosh Hashanah is born in the second of Rosh Hashanah. We don't hold of any of these kulas. The Gemara now is disturbed. Why did Rabbi Yehuda need to tell us 3 kulas? If it had just told us 1, we could have extrapolated the other 2. Why do you have to tell me all 3? It says, well, the first kid's Reisha, that's the Bachis Magia. As we mentioned, according to many shittas, the Eiruvin Tchumen is nothing. You're not actually doing anything. All you're doing is in your mind deciding that this place should be my Kiddush, that place. So therefore, you might have thought that that's why it's permitted. But when you take a bunch of grapes, the Mexican Masakan, where you're actually taking the grapes apart and you look like you're Masakan, this looks much worse. Separated to some maestros when you're doing it on Rosh Hashanah, that looks much worse, and therefore it should be forbidden. If it would have said the 2, that's you're allowed to do Ruvei Tchumen and you're allowed to fix your tumas, there's no reason to forbid it. Because at the end of the day, you know, one day is weekday, one day is Yom Tov. Our Beitza Dikkel Mixabot, by an egg, Chazal did not want people to eat eggs on Yom Tov, which were born on Yom Tov. Why not? There are 2 reasons. To prepare a notion. Fruit that fell off a tree, you're not allowed to eat on Yom Tov. Why not allowed to eat on Yom Tov? May I come to pick it? We could discuss it. There's something we could discuss it. Right, if it fell off. Another reason is Mishumashkin Shazavu, interesting Gemara based on that what? If you eat an egg, so then what will happen is you'll say, well, the egg came from the chicken, I'm allowed to eat the egg. So the grapes, wine came out of the grapes, I'm allowed to drink the wine. And then you'll eventually come to squeeze the grapes. So therefore, they don't allow you to eat eggs that come from chickens either. So therefore, you might have thought that since Chazal were concerned when you eat eggs to forbid it, so Abiyudah told us 3 chidushim. Not only by Tchumen when you're doing nothing, I permit it, but even by grapes, where I took to some ice, where you're doing something, even that I permit, and even eggs I permit, even though there's a sword to be goes. Yes, I know. It's interesting. More says there that it's all one. When they made the Gezerah, Mashkin Shazavu, they included in that Gezerah also eggs. Tanya, another more big Zabraisa, which actually just repeats our Mishnah, with slightly more detail how you do this to Misamasis. How did Abiyudah say that you can make a condition on a bowl of food on the first day and then actually get around to eating it only on the second day? What was the case? He has 2 bowls of teva. Really, he doesn't need to have 2 bowls, he can have 1 bowl, but it's easier to describe the example when he's got 2 bowls. So Omer, he says as follows. The first day of Rosh Hashanah, he says like this, Omer. If today is a weekday, and tomorrow is really that Kodesh day, so this bowl should be true on that. If today is actually Rosh Hashanah and tomorrow is a weekday, it's as if I've said nothing. And then you say this is Tumus Maisras, you put it aside. You take 1 bowl, you put it aside. The next day you say as follows: if today is a weekday, this should be true on this. If today is Kodesh, I've said nothing. You call it a name of Tumas Maisras for Oichla, and then you can eat it. Mamish describing in great detail, as we explained, that you have to say both days the whole condition. If today is Yom Tov, say nothing. If it's not Yom Tov, take Tumas Maisras. Let's do the same thing the next day. And then the second day you can eat it because we manav shechutin tukuna.
You end up taking double truma.
No, you take the same fruit twice. You take the same bowl, which whatever you designate as Tumas Maisras the first day, you use that again the second day. It says, well, the verse continues, Yosi Oisa. The Yosi forbids it, like we saw in our Mishnah, that's the Chachamim, that why is it forbidden? Because Rosh Hashanah is considered 1 day. So did Rav Yosi forbid on the 2 Yomim Tovim of Godus. The simple pshat over here is what? Even other Yomim Tovim, because Rav Yehuda was talking about Rosh Hashanah, and Rav Yosi forbids it, and Rav Yosi adds the 2 days of Yom Tov. It's Mashba, Pesach, Sukkot, Shavuos. He asks them all. That is the simple reading. And so he forbade all the Yom Tov Shabbos. So more that brings a story which then they examine what does Rabbi mean over here. There was this young deer to also the Reish Kelusa, that they brought it to the Reish Kelusa. The Reish Kelusa was the head of the Golus. Not always was he the biggest Talmud Chacham, many times he wasn't. He was the leader. It said B'Yom Tov Rishon Shegolus. He got hunted on the first day of Sukkot, let's say. Ve'ishtachit B'Yom Tov Sheni. Shechting is not a pub, you're allowed to shecht Yom Tov, but hunting you're not allowed to. So it was hunted the first day of Sukkot, and the second day it was shechted. Would you allow it to be eaten?
Yeah, because it's two separate kedushas.
If you hold this two separate kedushas, then yes.
Yes, that's what I would have said. It's two separate kedushas. What of shach? It's okay. That's right. That's what I would have said. Yes, because what of shach? Second day is Sukkot. Think to circus. If the yesterday was a weekday, so I hunted it on the weekday. If yesterday was Yom Tov, so today it's no longer Yom Tov. Today it's weekday, so I should be allowed to eat it. Now there is a halacha that if you do a malacha on Shabbos or Yom Tov, you always have to wait after Shabbos or Yom Tov b'chdei sheyas, the amount of time that you would benefit from it. But here we're talking about where it passed b'chdei sheyas as well. So the Gemara says like this: Rav Nachman Rav Chisda ochlu, Nachman Chisda ate from it. Rav Sheshes lo ochal, Rav Sheshes refused to eat. Or Rav Nachman said, by Avdei Rav Sheshes lo ochal b'sed Tavia, he obviously doesn't like. In English, it's called venison, actually. Deer meat is called venison. Rav Sheshes doesn't like venison because you can see that he's not eating. Now, the Gemara over here just says exactly the same reply from Rav Sheshes, where Rav Sheshes' reply is, what do you will do? How could I possibly eat? We had a minute ago, Rabbi Yossi has been explained. What did Rabbi Yossi say? What did he mean, Shnei Yom Tov? Pashtus, the simple explanation of Rabbi Yossi is that any Yom Tov of Chutzlot, where you have to keep 2 days, not just that Etzal, which is only Rosh Hashanah, but any Yom Tov of Golius means that the broad. Whenever you have a Yom Tov of Golius, where you have to keep 2 days, you also are machmir, that's one kedusha. So Shesha said, I can't possibly eat, not because I don't like this meat. I like the meat, but I can't eat it because I wanted to keep the right thing. The Gemara now brings two versions of how Shesha spoke. Both versions are very, very similar. It took me time to work out what exactly is the difference between the two versions. It's a very interesting thing, but one actually once said this to me. That the Gemara many times says, so-and-so said it, says maybe so-and-so said it, maybe so-and-so said it. Sometimes you think to yourself, like, who really cared? No, the Gemara says that it shows you that the Gemara wanted us to realize that nothing was written, everything had to be checked out. Did Rav Sheshes reply in this way, or did he reply the other way? The gist of what Rav Sheshes is saying is, I wanted to eat the meat, I couldn't because of Rabbi Yossi that says that you can't. But how he said it, the Gemara says now two versions. What's the two versions? So one version is like this: Amaru Rav Sheshes, how could I eat? The Tani Isi, sorry, I quoted Rabbi Yossi before. The Gemara is quoting another price, which is the same thing. The Tani Isi, Amaru Isi Tani. As
Is he taught the price of yours?
No. No, that's not how Rashi explains it. I'm sorry. Rashi explains it like this. The Tani Isi. That means, how can I eat the Tani Isi? Because Isi said that you're not allowed to. Meaning, this is the Rabbi Yossi. Wait a second. And some say that what he said was like this: Isi Tani. That means the two versions are like this. One version he said is, how could I eat? The Brisa says not to. The other one, he never said the expression, how could I eat? And then use the Brisa to support him. Rather, he said, you want me to eat? But the Brisa says as follows. That means one version is, he said, I can't eat, how can I eat? And then he used the Brisa to support his assertion that he can't eat. The other version, he never said I can't eat. All he said was, but the Brisa says, and he never said I can't eat. He just used the Brisa b'loshen tem. If you look at Rashi, that's how Rashi explains. There's one way he said is, I can't eat because the Brisa says, and then he was using the Brisa as a positive support to the assertion that he can't eat. The other version is he never said I can't eat. He just said, but the Brisa says. That's what he said. Let's see the second version inside. Rabbi Yossi forbade on two shekels. Maybe Rabbi Yossi meant something else. Rabbi Yossi meant was that not only is it forbidden in Eretz Yisrael, it's also forbidden in Bava. That means he was only talking about Rosh Hashanah, not like you explained before. He was only talking about Rosh Hashanah. And he was saying, not only is Rosh Hashanah forbidden, that which is on the first day for the second day, but it's also forbidden in Chutz La'aretz as well on Rosh Hashanah. Shalgodius means of the exiles, meaning that the Yom Tovim which the exiles keep. What the Yom Tovim which the people in exile keep? Chutz La'aretz is Pesach, Shavuot, Sukkot, because the ones that the 2 days Rosh Hashanah, everything keeps in the exile as well. So Golius means Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot. Had he meant to say, I want to, that Rabbi Yossi forbade it also in Chutz La'aretz, Rabbi Yossi should have said better than that. What should Rabbi Yossi have said? V'chein b'goyla, also in Golus, not Shel Golius of the exiles, meaning the Yom Tovim on the Golus. Oba Abasi, Ubay Kush, Duba Achikaba. V'chein yo Rabbi Yossi, Yossi, Issa, Shnei Yom Tovim Shel Golius, Ki Shnei Yom Tovim Shel Rosh Hashanah, Lo Abanon Deshavu. That means he makes a whole doichak into the words of Rabbi Yossi. Rashi himself tells us it's a huge doichak. And the Ritva explains the reason we make a big doichak is because with the halacha is one Gittin says we always pass like Rabbi Yossi. And Rabbi Yossi couldn't possibly have made sense for Rabbi Yossi to have said that you're not allowed to, for 2 days of Sukkot, be machmir from one produce to the next day. That doesn't make any sense. But what again, let's start off slowly. What did Rabbi Yehuda tell us? If you've got a bowl of fruit which haven't taken to some ice from, what should you do? Right, like that. Rabbi Yossi said, no, you're not allowed to. And so did Rabbi Yossi say on the 2 days on Yom Tov God. First of all, I wanted to say he meant Rosh Hashanah and Chutz La'aretz. God says, no, that's not the one. Can't be that. So he means 2 days of Yom Tov. The one doesn't like that. Because if he meant 2 days of Yom Tov, then it comes out that Rabbi Yossi is coming up with a huge chumrah. That on Pesach or Shavuos and Sukkot, you're not allowed to make this condition. And as Rashi explains, will agree to them, that won't make any sense because we all know that every day of Yom Tov is a Sophic Yom Tov, Sophic good days. Of course, you're allowed to make a taste. You shouldn't be allowed to. Elamai, Pshat and Rabbi Yossi must be something else. How can we explain Pshat like this? Going back to the words of Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yossi said the forbiddingness of the 2 days of Yom Tov of Pesach, Shavuos, and Sukkot, the Issa Shaboy, is equal to the Rosh Hashanah of the Chachamim who permit it. That's what he meant to say. Again, that which is forbidden on the 2 days of Yom Tovim of Goliath is equal to the Issa of Rosh Hashanah, which the Chachamim really permitted. Let's say it inside again. The Issa of the 2 days of Yom Tov, like the 2 days of Rosh Hashanah which Chachamim permit. We had previously that Chachamim say that 2 days of Rosh Hashanah, we had it in Amud Aleph, that they permit it. So therefore, Rabbi Yossi doesn't agree with that. Rabbi Yossi himself holds it's awesome. So Rabbi Yossi said like this, regarding Rosh Hashanah, I hold it's awesome. I hold it's awesome. But V'chein, and so too, all other Yom Tovim, they are like you, meaning you said that the Rosh Hashanah is permitted, I say Rosh Hashanah is forbidden. V'chein, and all other Yom Tovim, I say it's like you that it is permitted. That's how you have to fit in Rabbi Yossi's words. So it comes out like this. According to this explanation, does anybody hold that it's forbidden to eat, to do this shtick of Rabbi Yehuda on a normal Yom Tov? No, nobody holds it. We had Rabbi Yossi advice, but we explained that Rabbi Yossi doesn't mean to say asa, Rabbi Yossi means to say mutter. And what he means to say, all Yom Tovim are permitted like Rosh Hashanah of the Chacham. So therefore, this deer, which was hunted on the first day and slaughtered on the second day, which Rav Nachman ate and Rav Sheshes didn't, who was correct? Rav Nachman. So the Gemara carries on a little bit the story. Ashkei Rav Sheshes Rabbi Bar Shmuel. Rav Sheshes met Rabbi Bar Shmuel. Omalei. So he said to him, Tani ma midi b'kedushas. Do you know any braysos regarding the kedusha of Yom Tov? Omalei Tanina. I've learned a braysa moide Rav Yossi b'shnei Yom Tov shegolios. Rav Yossi agrees that when it comes to 2 days Yom Tov of Pesach, Shavuos, and Sukkot, that you're allowed to make this condition and you're allowed to eat it on the second day. Why allowed to eat on the second day? Because it's definitely one of the days is weekday. If you meet them, don't tell them this price, because I'm embarrassed. He agreed in the end. All Yom Tovim is permitted, except for Rosh Hashanah, which is forbidden. All Yom Tovim is Safek Shabbos, Safek Yom Tov, Safek Chol, it's permitted. and all the other Yom Tovim, except for Rosh Hashanah, which is forbidden. Now Rashi over here, it's very interesting. You don't often get it. Chullin, you get it much more. The second to the end of the middle lines, all the way to the bottom of the page, a long Rashi, where Rashi goes to Halacha L'Maisa. And Rashi brings proof after proof after proof that you're allowed to consider the second day Yom Tov as a Sofek Yom Tov Sofek weekday. And therefore, regarding eggs, it is mutter. And regarding something which was hunted, it is mutter. And anything which happened on the first day Yom Tov, you're allowed to take to the second day Yom Tov. So let's say somebody brings you from out a post on Yom Tov, first day out of the Tchum, then you're allowed to use on the second day Yom Tov, right? Or anything like that. Rashi is a tremendous long Rashi. And he brings rice from all over the places in Shas where it's permitted to rely. What? Well, the Shabbos you won't be allowed to. Very good. As David pointed out, if one of them is Shabbos, you can't do that. Why? Because you can't rely. Maybe what the other one was Kaddish, so you can't. And Tais over here brings Rashi, and he brings the Bahag, Baal Halachas Gedolos, that argues, well, actually, Baal Halachas Gedolos comes before Rashi. Baal Halachas Gedolos forbids it, and Tais says that Rashi is right, and that we pass like Rashi, and therefore you can be made for. Okay, it's actually quite a long Tais. Okay, so therefore it's mutter. Right. By the way, if you want to see, it's very nice to see it. If you look Tais Mem Amud Aleph, it's about 15 lines down. Tais says, "Ubeshabbos v'Yom Tov, af lepirush Rashi osem mizel hazeh." If you got it, you should underline it. Tais says that according to Rashi, it'll come out if one says Shabbos, one says Shabbos. The more carries on that, a tiny little version of this story. Omar Rashi, Liddi Omar li Ameimer, and Meimer told me that the story we just quoted about the deer was incorrect. It was never hunted. Top of Mem Amud Aleph. It came out of the Tchum, and it came on that day. Not that it came on the first day Yom Tov, and this was the second day Yom Tov. This was the first day Yom Tov, and it came out of the Tchum on that day. Why were we allowed to eat it? That if something's bought, let's say a guy brings a deer from out of the Tchum for you, I'm allowed to eat it. Because what's the issue of being nana from a guy? Because we're scared that you'll ask the guy to do it again. But over here, you never gained out of it. He bought it for you, and I'm eating it. He agrees with him that what's bought for one Yid is permitted for another Yid. But he felt that Reish Galusa is different. Why is Reish Galusa different? Whether something is bought for the Reish Galusa, he was like the head of the yeshiva. So if he was the head of the yeshiva, when your goy bought the deer for him, he wasn't thinking just of the Reish Galusa. He was thinking of all the Talmidim there. And therefore it was forbidden. The Gemara says, if that's the case for Ashkar Shishis Rabba Bar Shmuel, we had a continuation of the story of Shishis met Rabba Bar Shmuel. Rabba Shmuel told him about that price, and he said to him, please don't repeat it because it's embarrassing. So the Gemara says, that never happened. So that story never happened. It's got two versions of the story. Either it was hunted on the first day, and the second day they ate it as Suffolk, and we passed like of Nachal is permitted, or it was bought on the first day, ate on the first day, and the reason it was permitted was because it was bought for one Yid, and this was given to another Yid, and the one who was Machmir was concerned that the Reish Galusa, when you bring it for one, is forbidden, and that's how we passed it. It's important to halacha that if a guy does a malacha for you, I'm allowed to be nana. If a guy does a malacha for all of us together, none of us are allowed to get pleasure. It's important to halacha. So if a guy specifically bought for you, let's say he knows you, it's your worker, so then I'm allowed to use it. No, I'm allowed to use it straight away because he didn't bring it for me. Let's say it's your worker, right? Your worker does something, brings you, I don't know, does some malacha for you on Shabbos, cuts an apple off the tree, gives it to you. I'm allowed to do it because it did it for you, not for me. I'm allowed to. But if you bought it for the group of us, then none of us are allowed to. Okay, so we'll stop over here. We're up to Daf Mem Amud Aleph. Okay, very good. It's interesting that we have like a lot of these studies of Rosh Hashanah, Mamish on the day of Rosh Hashanah. I mean, not on the day of Rosh Hashanah, preparation for Rosh Hashanah. Very good. Any questions? Yes, it could everybody be awesome. Yeah, okay. I'm pressing end, Moshe, the thing, right?